one thinks of the golden era of WWE managers, their minds tend to harken back to what's considered the company's golden age. The usual suspects always get mentioned: Bobby the Brain Heenan, Sensational Sherry, Jimmy Hart, Classy Freddie Blassie, the Grand Wizard, Slick, Mr. Fuji, Paul Bearer, Captain Lou. I mean, talk about the perfect rogues gallery of schemers, deceivers, and eccentrics. Clearly, managerial prowess in WWE peaked right around there, but there have been some tremendous managers since, including Jim Cornette, Sonny, Vicky Guerrero, and Paul Heyman. That latter group earns plenty of acclaim for their time spent as managers, but of that group, only Heyman is truly contemporary as far as WWE goes. That's because, for many years, WWE downplayed the concept of the manager, either sticking an inexperienced Diva Search runner-up in the role of glorified cheerleader, or using a legendary wrestler to give rub to a younger talent for a brief amount of time. Make no mistake, while Heyman's easily one of the greatest managers ever, we appreciate him more because he's a truly rare breed, especially these days. Here in the new Roaring 20s, we've seen managers pick up steam once more, particularly in AEW. But post-Golden Age, WWE has had some true gems in the role of antagonistic advisor, less heralded as they perhaps may be. The video ahead gives some due recognition to some of these forgotten gems. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 underappreciated WWE managers. Join us! Number 10, the Jackal. Long before he was the Invisible Hand, Don Callis was largely invisible during his years spent in Attitude Era WWE, as something was keeping his obvious talents from rising to the top. An invisible hand, perhaps. Such a calm, confident speaker with a knack for villainy, Callis entered WWE in 1997 as the Jackal, a replacement manager for a stable of South African apartheidists called the Truth Commission. Callis looked out of place in this go-nowhere group, especially in an olive green shirt and patent leather boots, so he quickly pivoted toward the messianic manipulator role that he would come to perfect. Oft compared to notorious cult leader David Koresh in this guise, Callis broke away from the commission, solely managing its Goliath centerpiece, Kurgan. That led to him adopting a stable of ostracized misfits known as the Human Oddities. Later, he began managing Farouk and Bradshaw when the two first came together at the end of 1998, but Callis was let go from WWE shortly after. While his time as a manager didn't yield much kayfabe success, Callis shined whenever he had a chance to speak, which is hardly surprising when viewing him in later capacities. While the Jackal didn't really get much strong material to work with in WWE, Callis's devilish grandeur still managed to ring through. Number 9, Nidia. While managers are usually defined by their promo abilities and a general sense of business savvy, Nidia's character contrasted those parameters. In a sense, she was more of a valet than a manager when it came to her on-screen relationship with Jamie Noble in 2002 and 2003, but it's certainly hard to argue that Noble's run as king of the cruiserweight / trailer park would have been quite the same without her. Somewhat similar to how Paul Bearer enhanced The Undertaker by acting as a companion piece, Nidia completed Noble, even if the characters weren't all that deeply nuanced. Where credit is also due is how Nidia took to the role. In the run-up to her victory on the first season of Tough Enough, Nidia was very much a what you see is what you get sort of person. Understated but positive, the sort of unassuming girl next door that doesn't offend anybody's sensibilities. That's why it was a bit jarring, in a good way, to see her aggressively swapping spit with the redneck messiah, an overly amorous gleam evident in her eye. Overall, Nidia's time as a ringside accompaniment may have been relatively brief, but she managed to shine in a role that could have easily been played two-dimensionally by another performer. For her enthusiasm and the manner in which she complimented Jamie Noble, Nidia deserves her share of appreciation. Number 8, Clarence Mason. The old saying is that everybody hates a lawyer until they need one. The slimy litigator trope has been mined many times in all forms of entertainment, and pro wrestling's no different. In 1995, Jim Cornette sought to have the tag team title change at the Third in Your House overturned, so he called upon the aggressive, fast-talking Mason to put the screws to President Gorilla Monsoon. A lawyer by trade outside of wrestling, the real-life Herman Stevens was an obvious natural for the role of Mason, and very quickly became a regular on WWE programming. An obvious parody of O.J. Simpson attorney Johnny Cochran, Mason came along just as the famed trial was ending and took his name from early 20th century lawyer Clarence Darrow and fictional defender Perry Mason. Earlier on in his run, Mason was more of a manager to a manager, representing Cornette, a man that certainly needs nobody to speak for him. Later, Mason became a manager outright, seconding kayfabe client Crush, tag team champions Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith, and the first incarnation of the Nation of Domination. Though prolific, one could argue that Mason was actually underutilized in the role, given that he was an effective speaker with an obvious skill for commanding attention like any good lawyer. The evil lawyer character really should be done more in a medium as wacky as wrestling, with Mason's performances being a solid template for how it's done. Number 7, Zeb Coulter. Maybe the character's points of views are a little touchy, but there's no denying that Dutch Mantell is a hell of a promo. A veteran of the business for close to 50 years, Mantell returned to WWE in 2013 to manage a suddenly patriotic Jack Swagger, while himself espousing anti-immigration views. You can certainly argue that it's a rather needless and uncomfortable subject for pro wrestling to weave into its storylines, but what can't be argued is just how important Zeb was to Swagger. The All-American American was never a strong speaker, but with old Dutch on the mic, Swagger was given life. And that is the purpose of a manager, isn't it? To make up for any charisma deficiencies a wrestler may have by speaking on their behalf. Time had certainly not lessened Dutch's ability to draw heat, and even if he had less controversial material, he would have probably still elevated Swagger anyway. Those who know their history will recall that this certainly wasn't Zeb's first run with WWE, as he managed the likes of the Harris twins and a young Bradshaw in the mid-90s while working under the name Uncle Zebekiah. He never really got a chance to shine in that role, but as Colter, Dutch truly reinforced how valuable a wrestling manager can be, especially one with decades of experience in working crowds into a frenzy. Number 6, Theodore Long. Seemed like a waste of a perfectly good wrestling personality like Teddy Long to have him do little more than don referee stripes at the turn of the millennium, but WWE eventually learned the error of their ways. Managers were largely a dying breed outside of Heyman in early 2003, but Long helped aid the seemingly lost cause when he traded the zebra shirts in for stylish suits and a lack of filter. Now managing the likes of D'Lo Brown, Rodney Mack, Jazz, and Christopher Nowinski, Long was an enterprising advisor with high hopes and little patience for what he felt was evident prejudice. Though cast as a heel, Long's pre-match speeches resonated with fans of all walks, partially due to his unique turns of phrase. He pined to one day see his face on the dollar bill and chastised rivals for drinking Haterade while encouraging crowds to back the Mac when Rodney Mack was in action. Long proved so entertaining as a manager that he was eventually elevated into the role of SmackDown General Manager, a position he held for the better part of the ensuing decade. While that did the managerial scene no favors, Long did come to champion tag team wrestling and Undertaker singles encounters as something of an unintended meme, so there is that. It's hard to believe that Long spent 4 years in WWE as a flavorless referee before somebody finally said, wait a minute, he's Theodore Long, why the hell are we wasting him? Number 5, Lio Rush. Make no mistake, inside the ring, Lio Rush is a dynamic talent, a cruiserweight that can take to the air, but can make magic with workers of all styles and backgrounds. A wrestler being relegated to the role of a manager sometimes feels like a demotion, but in a WWE that still heavily populates itself with awing heavyweights, being a manager may have been Rush's best ticket to the big stage. And to his credit, as the hype man for Bobby Lashley, Rush made the most of the time he was given. Similar to the Brock Lesnar-Paul Heyman connection, Lashley was the muscle and Rush was the hustle. Lashley stands there looking intense and confident, while Rush proudly and loudly extols his virtues like a punchable carnival barker. And yes, Rush was punchable. The first time he spent one of Lashley's matches chanting his client's name over the house mic, fans were looking for something to throw at him. They eventually did tone down Rush's bombast to a more moderate level, but he remained suitably overbearing for the role he was playing. There's an obvious comparison between Rush and Jimmy Hart in that they're both big mouths with thin frames, the sort of heel managers you would want to see the hero throw for distance. While Rush has the talent to succeed in other roles, you can't help but admire the potential he had and still has in this one. Number 4, Davari. When Davari was at the side of an ascending Muhammad Hassan in the mid-2000s, he probably wasn't so much of a manager as much as he was a like-minded confidant and friend. When Hassan angrily lambasted America Americans for their stereotypical views in a post-9/11 world, there was Davari to follow up by exuberantly berating the crowd in Farsi. The fans booed the ranting, despite most of them probably not knowing what Davari was actually saying, but one thing was clear: the man had an energy about him. Davari was not the least bit shy. We've spoken about complementary allies in this video, and it's hard not to think of Davari when one remembers Hassan. Davari was a natural antagonist, though one could certainly question whether or not he and Hassan were really heels, given the point they were making. But whatever the dialogue was, Davari had the skill to deliver it combatively and with lots of gusto. When Hassan was forced to bow out following one monumentally stupid angle, Davari eventually transitioned to the likes of Kurt Angle, Mark Henry, and the Great Khali, but it wasn't the same. In those cases, he was secondary to his charges, whereas with Hassan, the two shone equally, and they had great potential as a double act. Just makes you wonder what could have been. Number 3, Melina. Like others in this video, Melina's larger contributions came in another capacity, as she had 5 reigns as some sort of women's champion under the WWE banner between 2007 and 2010. Prior to then, Melina was one of the more visible non-wrestlers on WWE programming as the manager of Eminem, Johnny Nitro, and Joey Mercury. The trio debuted together in the spring of 2005 as vacuous pseudo-elites from Hollywood, but their presence was quickly justified. Nitro and Mercury became WWE's most reliable tag team in short order, and Melina was the ideal spokesperson for the group. Melina seemed to have the biggest star potential of the three at the time, based on her character work, her obvious talent when she actually did wrestle, and to be frank, the fact that she was an attractive woman in what was still diva-era WWE. But Melina certainly had far more than good looks going for her, and it was evident in the matches her men wrestled. Oftentimes, Melina ran interference for Nitro and Mercury, and ended up taking rough bumps and harsh landings for her troubles, conjuring up memories of sensational Sherry's days as a manager a generation earlier. The Sherry parallels were also clear in Melina's twisted snarls, as well as her fearlessness in standing up to the men. Like Rush, Melina had much to offer in other roles, but nonetheless, she excelled as a manager. Number 2, Ric Flair. When you think of best WWE managers of the last couple decades, admit it, the Nature Boy didn't come to mind first, did he? Flair will primarily be known for 2 things, being arguably the greatest wrestler of all time, and for having a cast iron liver. Being a top-rate manager isn't as high up among his epitaph-worthy achievements, but when grouped in with Evolution, Flair took on the hybrid role of wrestler advisor more than well enough. He was still Ric Flair, but now with some of J.J. Dillon's old Horseman responsibilities on his plate. Whether he was cheating like crazy to help Triple H retain the World Heavyweight title, or serving as a mentor to rising stars Batista and Randy Orton, Flair was one of the driving forces that helped make Evolution work. Fans may have found it hard to boo Flair because, you know, he's Ric effing Flair, but they could certainly get worked up by him trying to screw over Booker T or Goldberg in a major title match. Like any good manager, Flair appeared to be absolutely driven toward the cause of his clients/proteges, as if getting them over was a matter of life or death to him. With Evolution, Ric Flair may have not been the center of attention as he was with the Four Horsemen, but he didn't have to be. He was still Ric Flair doing what he always has, making others look better. Number 1, Armando Alejandro Estrada. From Flair, we go to a man who made his debut at Flair's expense. The day after WrestleMania 22, the 57-year-old certified legend was cutting a promo on Raw when he was suddenly interrupted by a mysterious man in a Panama hat, sunglasses, and dark suit. Identifying himself as Armando Alejandro Estrada, the unfamiliar face berated Flair for being washed up. To clear Flair from his path, Estrada introduced the unyielding Umaga as his client, and the Samoan Bulldozer proceeded to demolish the 16-plus time world champion. While Umaga was an immediate curiosity, so too was his mouthpiece. Estrada quickly became a catchphrase machine as fans sang along with his pre-match spiel in unison, and it's not hard to understand why. Estrada had loads of charisma. His connection with Umaga, who came equipped with a major push, only kept Estrada and his arrogant musings at the forefront of Monday Night Raw. Portrayed as a man of privilege with connections to Fidel Castro, Estrada looked like he had all the tools to be a top heel for years to come. Unfortunately though, Vince McMahon functionally took over as Umaga's handler in 2007 during the Bobby Lashley feud, and Estrada was quietly and unjustly written out of matters. Those who remember Estrada remember him feeling like a revelation in 2006, a brilliant and captivating manager in an era that sorely needed one. One day he was there singing Umaga's praises with a cocky smile, and the next he was out of the picture with the suddenness in which he'd snap one of his cigars.